Hello folks, this is David Hurley of EasyChessTips.com, your pup chess bluffer, and today I want to talk about a game I played against my regular opponent in which I was black and he led with e4, and so I responded with my customary French defense, and it led into a setup known as the MacCutcheon defense. And in playing this defense, I managed to win this game. I had a one-point plan, essentially, which happened to work quite well for me. However, in looking at it on the Lichess board with the Lichess engine, it turns out that it actually was not the best way to go at all, because there are a number of ways in which white could have countered it with better play. So I want to take you through what I was thinking about, the simple plan I made, and how white responded and how white should have responded to prevent my cunning but only one-point plan from coming into being. So this is the situation as it developed. We have the MacCutcheon defense coming in with this move here of my bishop to b4. There's this counter bishop pin that goes on in the MacCutcheon defense, wherein white pins black's f6 knight to the queen, and black immediately counters by pinning white's c3 knight to the king. This is the classic pattern of the MacCutcheon defense. Now, white has quite a few options from here, of course, one of which is to advance the pawn to attack the knight. Now, if that happens, and it didn't happen in our game, but if that happens, black counters by advancing the pawn, the h-pawn, to attack the bishop. And then, as you can see, Lichess is recommending that white take the f6 knight with the pawn, which indeed is what my man John Watson also says is a stronger move. Essentially, if you take the knight with the bishop, then you are giving up the bishop pair. Black has the bishop pair, and black is able immediately to break up the center like so. So this actually gives black no problems with careful play, as John Watson puts it. So if you are white and you encounter the MacCutcheon defense, it is better to lead with this e5 pawn, advance e5 pawn, and take the knight with the e5 pawn. That is only one way of progressing, but it's certainly a good way, a solid way of continuing. And indeed, Lichess is recommending it, as we can see here. Lichess recommends that you take that knight with your pawn. You get this little counter engagement, and it looks as if white has picked up a pawn, though black should be able to get that pawn back with correct play. What black has still is the bishop pair. Interestingly enough, Lichess recommends exchanging off one of those bishops quite quickly to bring about one of the structural weaknesses that white has to deal with in the MacCutcheon defense, which is what I was working with, I'll show you later, which is this c3 pawn here. Let's mark this c3 square because it's a key square in the MacCutcheon defense. This pawn is weak, and black very often aims to undermine or to attack that pawn. And that, in fact, is what my plan for this game was, my one and only plan. In taking this pawn, just to finish this point off, black can then recapture that g7 pawn. So these are some ways of proceeding when you come up against the MacCutcheon defense if you're playing as white. This is the situation where the MacCutcheon defense has just come into play. My opponent, white, did not do either of those options. Instead, he immediately took the f6 knight with his bishop. Now, if you remember, that's an option that gives black no problems, according to John Watson. You can see an immediate retake with the queen is recommended, so that black has this bishop pair, whereas white does not. But for my part, I had my eyes firmly on getting a pawn onto this c3 square and proceeding with my plan. What's happened here? We have this situation. That knight has not yet moved. So this is how play went ahead. And we now get the pawn forced to move into that c3 square, a weak pawn on c3. This pawn is now my target, and everything I did in the game was aimed at attacking this pawn. Everything I did in the next few moves. And for my part in this game, my plan worked, but it is not a foolproof plan by any means. There's a little bit of pub chess bluffery involved in it, as I will show you. Now, light chess is recommending this solid move here, bishop to d3. What in fact happened was that the bishop got to d3 eventually via a quick check on b5. Now, light chess is recommending that I block the check with my bishop. And the reason for this is that, or one reason is to keep the c pawn ready for a jump or an advance to c5 as part of the attack on this c3 square. Because if the pawn jumps down here a bit later on, let's ignore this check for a while, or at least let's send that bishop back there. Okay, now you can see the recommended c5 move. White cannot take that pawn, or white can choose to take that pawn if he wants to. If white takes the pawn, we have the option, it's not actually being recommended by the engine, but the option of a check in here. And if white does not, so that's black has the option of checking via taking the pawn on c3. And if white does not want to lose the queen or exchange queens, white's only other option is to move the king. And you can see black is building up quite a nice advantage here. It's interesting to see that this pawn this instant grabbing of the pawn is not being recommended by light chess, but it doesn't seem to cause any problems for black. And so we're left with black having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns, and white having 5 pawns and really a broken up pawn structure on the queen side. However, none of that happened in our game. So where are we? Let's go back to this situation here. So we had so in fact I moved out my pawn to drive away the bishop. So the bishop came back down here. Now, this move is still available to me. It's just been a strange dance of 2 moves to get the bishop to d3 and my pawn, if I advance it to c5. But I didn't do that. It probably would have been better had I done it, strictly speaking. But I did a bit of a pub chess bluffer style move. I moved my queen to g5. Now, I don't really recommend this move because there's a perfectly good answer to it, which you can see here is attack the queen immediately with the knight on g1. g1 to f3, attacking the queen. And if you do that, the queen is then faced with, the queen is pulled off of the row on which I wanted her to be, because my target, as I will show you in a minute, is to get my queen over to a5. But by attacking the queen immediately with the knight, the queen is forced to move off of that file, or at least move away. The queen can, of course, come over here. But this is building up an advantage for white. I don't know if the queen will ever be able to get her move in. See, it's not being recommended right now, but right here the queen could come over, but the king has already moved away, so this pawn is not pinned at all. And we end up with something like this with a slight advantage still for white. None of that happened, however. I just want to show you another option. So if white attacks the queen may want to grab this pawn, but it's not really a great idea because it simply is a delayed exchange, and it allows white to get his rook up into black's defenses. This is quite a common tussle in the MacCutcheon defense. However, none of that happened because we had this move instead. This is where what I was talking about earlier, the pub chess bluffer style of move can often induce at this level of chess. This is a feinting attack, really. I'm not really intending to attack this pawn at all. But my opponent saw that the pawn was undefended and decided to move it forward instead of the sounder move of moving the knight to f3. So I got it. It effectively gives me time to achieve my target of getting the queen over to a5, and this is how we did it. And now the road is open for the queen to head over to a5 and then to pin the pawn to the king, or at least if the king hasn't castled, the king is not in any position to castle yet. So to pin the pawn to the queen, to the king, and then attack it later. I'm aiming to get my knight into the action as well. This square here, B5 is the target square for my knight to join the attack on the pawn. So with this move here, the G3 move, all this becomes possible as I open the door by taking the E4 pawn, and then you can even see Lichess recommending this move. So if advantage is not taken of what was actually not such an advisable queen move, the move to G5, then we can get in this attack on the weak C3 pawn. So now that has happened, how does white respond from here? Well, clearly the pawn needs to be defended, so white moves the queen up, which is indeed what happened in our game. And then instead of bringing the knight over there, I brought the knight to a6, preparing to get the knight up here. It's a 3-move wonder. And indeed, the knight was developed to f3. I bring the knight down. White castles. And now the next move of mine, continuing with my one-eyed plan to keep attacking or build up my attack on this c3 pawn. This is really the only thing I have in mind. It actually, you can see what's happened. The advantage bar has gone strongly in white's favor by moving my knight up to attack this pawn. It lets in the queen now, which wasn't taken advantage of. It lets in the queen up here. The reason being that the knight incoming here blocks this queen's guardianship of this row here. So the queen is able to get in and is now threatening to attack this pawn. If that had happened, if the queen had moved up here, it would have been quite a strong attack in Lichess's view. Even if I do the ideal moves, it's still not great for black in this situation. The advantage bar has tipped firmly in white's position. And this is really why my one-point plan, although it happened to work for me in this game, is not so good. there are strong ways to counter what I was up to in this game. Just play this through a few more times. And here, having built up an advantage, forces my knight back. So white is now nicely set up with a nice advantage against black in this situation. White has a 1 pawn advantage, I think, and a more developed position. Black has to do something with this bishop and get the rook moving too. So it's an awkward position for black to be in. Lichess gives white very good chances. So in short, there was a perfectly good response to my move of my knight here. The third move of my knight. It looks like I've got this double attack on the pawn, but with this strong queen move, you can totally counter black's one-eyed intentions. However, again, this is the pub chess bluffer level of chess. That didn't happen. What happened instead was an immediate attempt to dislodge the knight. So again, at this kind of casual chess level, people see threats and they try immediately to deal with them, even if the threat is not real or even if there's some better move available. So by attacking the c3 pawn in this way, I actually open up a nice advantage for black. Again, even though these are not the ideal moves. So I decided indeed to take the queen because it gives me a big advantage, as you'll see. The pawn structure is now broken up, and so at the very least I gain a 1 pawn advantage and a better pawn structure. Black's pawn structure is pretty sound. White's pawn structure is a bit of a mess. It's a prawn cocktail. And this is another mistake. So it's again this casual chess level, players are very often totally focused on removing what looks like an immediate threat, and in doing so can often create a worse situation. So by attacking my knight, the knight moves down and then picks up that pawn and is now looking at the bishop. The bishop moves away, and so you can see the advantage is firmly in black's favor because of these missteps by white in dealing with what was actually not an optimal set of moves by black at all. They just looked more threatening than they were. So we'll just play through the next few moves to see what happened. Now I'm aiming with this move. I'm aiming to open up this diagonal because the white's king is on that white diagonal, and I have a nice bishop looking to get onto the same diagonal. So I can draw my lines a bit straighter. And so I decide to advance my pawn to also I'm a material ahead. I have a 2 pawn advantage, so I'm quite happy to offer swaps off of pawns. That's not very well said, is it? I'm perfectly happy to swap off pawns when as I already have a material advantage. What we had instead is this situation here. I bring my knight out. This is a weak move. So again, immediately trying to remove a threatening piece or a piece from white's area, but not addressing the bigger problem, which is this check here, a discovered check. Incidentally, this discovered check, I guess this is my second plan of the game. I'm kind of hoping for a sucker checkmate here because now the bishop's here, checking that king. If instead of the Lichess recommended move, the king moves 1 step over, we have bang, checkmate here, with the bishop dominating this diagonal, and this unprotected e2 square lets in the knight, checkmate. and goodbye. However, although we're playing casual chess, my opponent saw the cunning plan, or the fairly obvious plan, and advanced his pawn as necessary, the pawn to f3, saving the game. So this pawn is protected by the rook and the knight, so it shuts me out for now. However, I maintain the advance. Instead of advancing the knight up to b3, my opponent wanted to get his king off that diagonal, very understandably, but it gave me time to improve my position by finally getting around to castling. The king is coming up to, I think, to protect this pawn, so that to free up his pieces is the idea. However, it gives me time to get my pieces into the action. Finally, that strong knight move comes in, but now it's too late, and I'm not really sure what's happening here. My opponent decided after all to move his king back to safety, and this is a mistake. This is a fatal mistake, actually. It's a mistake which brings the game almost to an end. The game continued for some time, but with a massive advantage remaining for black. It allows me to bring in my knight with that check, and here a fatal mistake happened. I mean, I was really just expecting the knight to dance in, say, check, and for the king to move somewhere relatively safe. But in fact, we have this fatal error, and now this is pretty much the end of the game, as the knight is forking the king and the rook. So, from a pub chess bluffer point of view, a simple plan led to victory, but it was in no way a sound plan if you look at the MacCutcheon defense in more detail. So I guess the tip for today is that when faced with the MacCutcheon defense, if you are white and you led with e4, don't panic and play something sound, not like that, but by advancing this pawn. That is probably the thing to do in this situation. Okay, anyway, that's how I managed to rack up another, I'm not sure entirely deserved victory, but then which pub chess bluffer victory is ever fully deserved, in playing the MacCutcheon defense against my opponent's e4 opening. However, I recommend that you research thoroughly the MacCutcheon defense so as to be better able to counter any pub chess bluffery style moves that black may throw at you if you are playing as white. Okay, that's all from me, David Hurley of EasyChessTips.com. Until next time.